Hello folks, and welcome back to the Vision of Veritas. So in searching throughout YouTube, I came across this video. It's labeled, Woke Students Can't Explain White Privilege. The owner of this channel, Sav, says, if you look throughout her videos, she goes throughout the country, she reports on different things, and quite honestly, she does a whole lot better than a lot of the other quote-unquote professional reporters in their field, but she does a fantastic job. But anyhow, she went to Gettysburg in my home state of Pennsylvania. She went to Gettysburg College there in order to take a look at why Gettysburg College postponed an event for people because they are tired of white cis men. Now, I'm from the generation where we still had a foundational base in reality, but it started to change. So I had to make sure I got this definition correct. And I looked up the modern definition of quote-unquote cisgendered. Because to be perfectly honest with you, granted I had heard it plenty of times, but I really didn't know what it meant, largely because I didn't care. But for the purposes of this video, I figured I'd better understand this modern terminology regardless of its legitimacy. So in doing so, I did what 99% of the other population would do, and I simply Googled what the term meant. And this is what I found out. Cisgender is a term used to describe a person whose gender identity corresponds with their sex assigned at birth. So, in other words, normal people. But now, in modern day society, we have to define it specifically in this micro group, because modern ideological thinking teaches that you can be whatever you want at any particular time as long as you feel you are that particular way. And that flies in the face of all logic and all biological thinking. But that's a topic for another time. But anyhow, that's what the term cis or cisgendered means. That apparently there was another portion of this where there was a senior project there that said, are you tired of cis white men? So Sav says here, she goes around on this particular college asking them to share or asking them to tell her why they think that white men, normal white men, have more privileges in society than anybody else. The responses that she receives are quite interesting. And the reason why is no one can actually answer the question. They can't really figure out why or what these privileges are, but they've been told from K through 12 all the way now into college that white people have privileges, specifically normal or quote-unquote cis white people, and even more specific to that, cis white men have privileges that no one else has in society. Let's take a listen to this here and break this down bit by bit.
Gettysburg College in Pennsylvania has recently postponed an event that centered around being tired of cis white men. So I'm at UT campus to ask students what they think about the event. Let's go find out.
Saying like we're tired of straight white men in society is really as like explicit as it sounds. I think it's just contributing to a general idea that like we're tired of straight white men having the power and everything, you know? And it's like we as women of color, as like students at this university, like we're very much capable of certain things, and we don't have the same privileges that are offered to straight white men.
And I've been hearing that from a lot of the ladies that I've been talking to today. Talk to me about what some of those privileges are that, you know, straight white men have that you don't have. Talk to me about that.
I think I don't really know. Have you ever experienced like a specific instance?
I don't know, but I also need to go.
I know, I do need to go. I'm sorry.
As especially people of color, we know the privileges or the advantages certain races have.
Talk to me about some of those privileges that white people have that you guys don't have.
I would just be like, okay, I guess I would start with, I am a black queer person. If I were to just walk amongst the streets, I'm also like women, like I look very feminine. If I were to walk across the streets in the dark as a black queer female presenting person, I would not feel safe because I feel like I would be pretty targeted. But if I were a white cis man, I don't think I'd be like the type of person someone would come up to and hate crime, because that's just not what happens.
Okay, so as usual, the first young lady that was asked this question, what privileges do white men have over you? For someone who's been indoctrinated for years, probably a decade, that white men have privileges, you'd think she'd be able to answer or at least give one valid example. But she can't do that. Instead, she simply ducks out and walks away, stating that she has to go to class. She cannot answer the question. Okay, so the second young lady here, she goes, as a black, queer, female presenting person. I assume that means that she's a woman, she appears feminine, and she's gay. She feels that she would be targeted because of her feminine gayness, I guess, going across the street at night. Well, my question to you is, first, how is someone going to be able to discern whether or not you're queer walking across the street, let alone walking across the street at night? And my second question is, how is a man potentially being safer at night walking indicative of white male privilege? That doesn't make any sense. It's not a privilege that men have. Now, I'm not saying that it can't be dangerous for women and, even some men in certain areas and certain neighborhoods going out on the streets at night, but I would hope you have the presence of mind and wherewithal to determine whether or not the area you're walking in is the best place to walk at. But as far as it being indicative of white male privilege, what do you say to the white males who aren't built as strongly, who maybe don't have the ability to defend themselves, perhaps even on the same level as a young woman? What do you say to those people? A privilege is something that is granted to an individual or group of individuals. You aren't granted safety and security by being a white male. That's not a privilege. That isn't something that you can't obtain. It's not a privilege because it doesn't have to be granted to you. It's not a privilege because it isn't something afforded to white men and white men only. It's more of an advantage. The thing is, you could gain that advantage if you so chose to. You could learn how to defend yourself. And this goes for men and women alike. You can learn how to defend yourself to mitigate the chances of something bad happening to you. Whether or not you should have to is an entirely different subject. But the fact is, being able to walk across the street at night because you're a white male, it's not a privilege. It's an advantage. It's an advantage that any woman could have too. If you're not physically built enough, if you're not skilled or have the desire to gain that advantage physically, there are a myriad of devices that may help even the odds as far as safety and security is concerned. That's also another reason why you shouldn't rely on somebody else for your own safety and security. You have the responsibility to take that on yourself. But to make the assumption that you're safer in a particular circumstance because you're a male or born a male, something that you have no choice over, isn't indicative of a privilege. It's an advantage that you can take advantage of if you so choose to. As a white man, you can be just as vulnerable as you, a young black woman, is. And whether you're queer or not has no bearing whatsoever on your ability to defend yourself or your vulnerability. Viewing yourself as a perpetual victim does not help the situation out either. In fact, it hinders it. It makes it much worse. A certain political party has separated us all by victim groups, pitting one group against another. And that can be traced all the way back to Lyndon Baines Johnson, LBJ. If you ever get the chance, take a look at LBJ's thought process, his writings, what his secretaries have said about him. He isn't the champion of civil rights like you've been told. But her answer to this question also goes back to the fact that the question can't be answered. If you're taught for a decade through the schooling system and the only thing you can come up with is walking across the street at night as a privilege when it's not a privilege, it brings into question the entire ideology behind men being privileged, specifically white men being privileged in society today. So next we have this white dude here, looking like a seemingly normal white individual. So he's asked the same question of, do you have privileges as a white male? And right off the bat, like a pre-planned muscle memory response, he goes,
I'm certainly cognizant of my own privilege because of my own race. This is the color of my skin.
What privileges are those?
Lots of I think there are certain assumptions that come with certain people. Like when they look at a black person or an Indian person, they automatically have this profile in their head, racial profiling. And that still exists. I mean, we're not going to escape that until human depravity itself goes away.
Oh, yes. Yes, I do have privileges. But then instead of naming something that he is privileged at or he has an advantage at, he goes immediately into the segregation of the races. He starts looking at the different subsets of racial division that's perpetuated by the Democrat Party, that's perpetuated by the left as a whole. Even he can't name a privilege. And ultimately, instead of answering the question, he comes up with something about racial profiling and the depravity of humans. So again, another non-answer because So far, the question can't be answered.
Talk to me about some of the privileges that white men are awarded that you guys are not awarded.
Definitely, like, I guess just getting away with situations. Like, if I were to, like, I don't know, like, I guess, here you go. I have to think about it. I can't.
It's situations like if I had a problem with, like, a male teacher and they were a white cis male, there was less of a chance for something to happen to them because of it. Like, I could literally report them for anything, but because of that, if they were, like, upstanding in the community, sucks to me, basically.
Do you think that it would be the same reaction if it was like a black male teacher?
No.
No. I think this problem would be solved immediately.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like POC people are, like, more targeted, or minorities are more targeted, especially with, like, crimes in general, or if a person of color was to do something wrong, people would deal with it more quickly than if it was a cis white male.
So the next responses we have here are from two young women. The first woman, she's all gung-ho, but obviously still can't answer the question because she cannot provide examples. Now the second woman here, she at least makes an attempt. The problem with this attempt, though, is that what she is describing has nothing to do with male privilege whatsoever. White, blue, pink, purple, black, or otherwise. What she is describing is a privilege that can be afforded to super wealthy people being able to buy themselves out of situations, or because of their money or their wealth, they're looked upon differently in society. I mean, all one has to do is look at Hunter Biden to see that that's true, or you could look to Oprah, or you could look to Maxine Waters. Because of their positions in society and because of their wealth, they are afforded specific privileges that you and I will never see. But that has nothing to do with being a white male. And there are no statistics and no documented evidence to even suggest what you're proposing here. In the year 2022, there was simply nothing to suggest or prove that being born a white normal male gives you an inherent advantage in society. Now, there are things that do give people as a whole advantages in society, but it has nothing to do with your race or the color of your skin. It has everything to do with your upbringing. And largely, it has a lot to do with whether or not you're brought up in a nuclear family. Whether you have a mother or father, both need to be presented in the home. That gives you the largest chance for success. Statistics back this up, but there's nothing to back up that based on your race, you are inherently advantaged. This brings up a separate question, though. Why is there such a concerted and singular effort to destroy the nuclear family by the Democrat Party? This has been going on for decades now, and again, it largely started with LBJ. Specifically, it started with the black population. And it's so unfortunate because the black population had some of the strongest, most tight-knit family values and sense of family as a whole. For a while there, nothing could rival that. And lo and behold, LBJ started the change for all of it. Again, that's another story for another time. But if you look into history, look into why he passed certain things that he did and why they were purposely vetoed when Republicans tried to pass it by Democrats. It's a doorway into the mind of just how sinister LBJ was and where the Democrat Party's mindset was back then, and largely how it hasn't changed all that much.
So you mentioned straight white men having more privileges. Can you talk to me about what some of those privileges are?
Yeah, so generally, there's not really ever a sense of like discrepancy whenever someone is trying to, let's say for instance, there is a man who commits a crime and he's, a regular looking white guy. Police are, generally more likely to not have adverse reactions to them. Say if they're like having any sudden movements or sharp movements, they'll generally be more lenient with them compared to if it was like a black or brown person.
Where do you get that analysis from?
Like statistics, crime statistics, rates of arrest compared to comparing white people to like black and brown people or minorities in general.
What would you say to people who say, like, the black community commits the majority of the crime, that's why they're more likely to be arrested? What would you say to that point?
I would say that there are certain factors of society that have contributed to black and brown people being more impoverished, and crime is sort of the way that a lot of people see an escape from this poverty.
So next we have a guy here that tries to invoke the standard rhetoric for questions like this, and you hear it all the time. And the long and the short of it is, he tries to say that because someone is born black, or someone of a different race, but generally, if someone's born black, they are more prone to be arrested because of their blackness. And the problem is, blacks do get arrested at a higher rate, but it's not because of their blackness. I hate saying that, but I don't know what else to say. They aren't arrested at a higher rate because they're black. They're arrested at a higher rate because they disproportionately commit a higher percentage of the crimes. You can't assume because a specific race is jailed more often that it's specifically because of them being a specific color. There's no data to back that up. There is, however, ample FBI data that shows that blacks are arrested for committing specific crimes at a higher rate because of those specific crimes, not because of the color of their skin. Now, we can make the argument, and this is backed up with fact and evidence, but we can make the argument that the decline of the nuclear family within the black community has directly correlated to a rise in crime in the black community. Again, that's another subject for that other video. But there is a direct correlation there. But that's not because of race. That's largely because of social programs in the 60s started by LBJ and the ideals that LBJ put forth and infused into the Democrat Party. They already had these views, but LBJ in specific, he really set the pace, and he really perpetuated the use of the black community as a victim class, is the first really large victim class for the Democrat Party to use for their own political gains. It's a tragedy and it's so unfortunate, but it's 100% factually, unequivocally correct. But again, it has nothing to do with a white male privileged simply for being born white. There are no laws on the books, none whatsoever, and I challenge anybody to name one that gives a white man privilege or a right over a black man. I can name several that prove the converse. There are ample examples of the converse because Democrats have made the black community into a victim class rather than uplifting them, saying, you know what, you can do anything you put your mind to. But again, it all historically links back largely to LBJ and the Democrat Party as a whole, but you're never taught that. You're taught that Republicans and conservatism as a whole are the genesis of all your woes or all of society's woes, and nothing could be further from the truth. Just like you being born white is an inherent privilege. And again, it's not true.
Stealing is a crime, but say you're a hungry man and you go into a grocery store and you steal some food for you or your family. Is that really a crime, or are you just trying to survive at that point,
And here we get into the degradation of morals in society. Several of my videos I've mentioned that right is no longer right and wrong is no longer wrong. He's showing that the lines of right and wrong are now blurred, that there is no absolute right and there is no absolute wrong, that you can justify anything based on your own personal situation, based on your own personal feelings. A wrong doesn't become right simply because you deem it so. That's not how things work. And if you garner this line of thinking at a young age that anything can be justified based on how you feel about it, just take that a step further and take that farther down the line. If you apply that line of thinking to anything, then you end up in a society where anything can be justified and therefore anything goes. Think of the ramifications of that. That's incredibly dangerous. There has to be standards, or there has to be a standard. So in closing, if you are born a white, normal male, are you privileged? Well, here you saw examples of both men and women who have been brought up in the public education indoctrination system. They have been completely and thoroughly told throughout the years that being born a white normal male is a stain on your identity for the rest of your human existence. Yet none of them, not a single one of them, could name a privilege or a right that a normal white man has over anybody. That's because it doesn't exist. I, as a white normal man, do not have any privileges over anybody. But that brings up a deeper question. Why do they want you to believe that certain groups have an advantage over others? Well, that largely goes back to what's happening right now in America. The left side of the political spectrum, whether you believe it or not, the evidence is overwhelming. But the left side of the political spectrum knows that the only way to maintain control is to have everybody pitted against one another. For the party that loves to brag or loves to say that they are the champion of everybody, they certainly have a twisted way of showing it because they have divided everybody into subgroups. They have divided whites against everybody. Whites against Indian, whites against Asian, whites against black, whites against every racial subgroup that there is in existence. They have pitted whites against everyone. But that's just one form of division. They've also pitted rich against the poor, men against women, women who think they're men, men who think they're women, against actual men and actual women. If there is a way to divide and segregate peoples, it has been done, it has been found out, and it has been implemented, no matter how petty or major it is, or it has been made into. That's ultimately what's on display here. Young people who have been brought up thinking that someone else has an advantage or a disadvantage based on their minority or perception of a minority subgroup. Now, I'm not saying that everybody's equal, that people don't have struggles specific to them. Everybody has that. And you're also a sum of your life's choices as well, both good and bad. But that's one of the great things about this country that is slowly being dissolved. Here in America, you can choose to get out of your current economic condition if you work hard enough. That is still achievable in this country, at least for right now it is. They try to make you think it isn't that way, because by keeping everybody divided the way they do, they have ultimate control over the populace, a united population, one that stands for each other regardless of any differences, regardless of any circumstances you may or may not be born into. A unified society is one that you can't control. We have gone from a government of the people and by the people to a government of the powerful through the influence of individuals controlling the puppets at the top, to which you will never actually see until it's all said and done. Bottom line is this: if you're listening to this and you are a straight, normal white male, you do not have an inherent privilege. You do not have an inherent right over anybody. You are not a victim class of that, just like anybody else isn't a victim class, regardless of what you're told. The longer they can make you believe this stuff, the more time they have to grab control of a free and independent people, the last bastion of independence in the world enshrined in the Constitution. Once that is slowly chipped away like it has been, and once it's fully taken away, the only way it's gotten back is with much bloodshed. And as a society, that is the last thing we should want, especially when we have a flawed, there's always flaws, but you have a flawed but a more perfect system than any other place on the planet. Don't fall for the never-ending perpetual trap the left has of making you feel as though you are a victim. You're not a victim, not if you don't choose to be. Thank you for joining me today for the Vision of Veritas. If you got anything out of today's video, please like, share, and subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. Now, we do our best to point out the lies, the deception, and the never-ending hypocrisy that the left so prevalently forces throughout our society today. Take care, my friends.